All right, one more, and then we're going to do a break. And you're going to like this one. I like this guy, and you guys do too. This is Dr. Chris Ma. Dr. Chris Ma knows every starfish I've ever put in front of him, apparently. And not only, he just a really cool dude, knows exactly what he's talking about, and probably, you guys are going to be blown away by this talk. I'm actually really fascinated by this. So we'll get into it. With a thirst for starfish, Dr. Chris Ma.
Yeah, that part. Thank you. So, starfish. Starfish are iconic animals. They are among the best known of marine animals. They are exclusively animals that live in the ocean. If I take you out somewhere and say that you're going to give me $50, and if I can show you a starfish in a lake, then I just took $50 from you. But starfish occur all over the world, and they have this iconic imagery which pervades into every aspect of life. Japanese toys, glow-in-the-dark, starfish with nipples that run with bikini shorts, giant mutant starfish created by Disney chasing half-naked women, and Justice League starfish that take over your brain. But this is the iconic starfish, soothing, relaxing. This is actually very ironic because starfish are actually, these particular starfish are probably not actually sand beach animals, so they're probably going to die. But starfish, there's some 1,900 species of starfish. There's a minority of them which actually live in shallow water. The majority of them live in deeper water, in areas below 200 meters. Now, just to give you some credentials, by the way, there are some 1,900 species of starfish. There were about 1,875 until I started working a few years ago. So it's been busy. Now then, so shallow water stuff, everybody knows it. But if we move on, we look at some of the really interesting diversity, some of the forms that most of you are probably not familiar with. There's some weird shit that lives in the deep sea. So here we have giant starfish from Japan. Where else would you find it? What's called a brasingid starfish. These can actually capture prey with those long spines. Little shrimps will swim through them, get caught on this Velcro, and bam, they're food. This thing is weird because it's like a living blanket draped on the bottom of the seafloor. It's about, I don't know, a foot across. I've literally held them. You can hold them up into the light, and you can see light through it. They're just fucking weird. This is something that is also kind of cool. These are slime stars. These are, they vary in size, but they can get up to about 1.5 feet across, a 1.5 foot wide pillow of mucus. That's all this is. There's like sort of a basic starfish structure underneath, but all of this orange stuff that you're seeing, that's gelatin. When you pull these things up, they kind of react poorly because the only thing that makes this better than just being a giant pillowy starfish filled with mucus is mucus. I've pulled these up from submersible dives, and you can put them into a bucket, and a moment later they're filled with mucus. So really some of my favorite things in the world to work on. Now, I wanted to tell you a little bit today about a really strange one that lives in the deep sea. This particular species lives between 2,000 and 3,000 meters. When you consider that Jim Cameron went down to 10,000 meters, that gives you an idea of just how deep these things live. Starfish are actually recorded down to 6,000 meters. So starfish have pretty much been there since, before anybody else got, well, not everybody else got there, but they're deep. You can see them in a lot of places. People don't realize that. But essentially, these are weird little things. There were 3 species. They were first described in 1987. And until 2007, there weren't any other known. No one had seen one for 20 years. And then I got a call. I went up to the museum in Chicago, and boom, there they were. And I was asked to describe one. I named them after the scientist who found them. Now, these are weird things. They live on deep sea wood. I mean, wood. So this isn't, and remember what I said, 2,000 meters. Wood is found at 2,000 meters. This actually creates a viable ecosystem. There's like a dozen species that live on wood in the deep sea. I mean, how many times do you come up in discussion and think, yes, the natural habit of the starfish is the tree. So, bizarre. But one of the things about it is, whenever you get something that's really freaky weird like this, people just have to look at it and go, how? What the fuck? And so we go on from there. And so following its description, we get on to further questions about, well, how did this evolve? What kinds of steps led to the body form that it currently has? So just to give you some scale, by the way, these are maybe 1/2 centimeter across. Instead of the sort of traditional 5-part rays where all the tube feet radiate from the center, the tube feet are actually right around the edge in a ring. So kind of weird. They don't have intestines. Now, before I start on some of the stories about like where it came from, a bit of introduction. So starfish don't reproduce the way we do. That's probably safe to say to everybody. Gametes, the eggs and the sperm from the males and the females are released into the water, and they evolve. They develop after they've inseminated one each other, and they turn into sort of a larval form, a kind of floating embryo. And this then eventually settles onto the bottom and then develops into sort of a larger form of different types. It goes through a lot of different stages before it reaches that, and it can stay in the water floating like a little baby for quite a long time, anywhere from days to weeks to some people who even think months to years. Now that introduces us to something interesting even still, because when they're in the water, they're sort of subject to all sorts of environmental factors. This includes the amount of nutrients, the amount of salt, the amount of where the current goes. So here's the takeaway lesson the other takeaway lesson. If you have something like oil, bad chemicals, pollution, these things can all affect the larva. The adults will certainly be affected, but really the big issue oftentimes is that you have problems with sort of pollution, and these can affect all of the little forms, and you won't see that damage for years. So that was lesson number 2. Lesson number 1 was stuff from the surface gets down to the bottom. So the immediate thought was, well, they're small, they kind of look like these larvae, so one of my colleagues suggested, well, these are probably juveniles, or what's called pedomorphic. And these are basically adults that retain juvenile characters. Most of you were familiar with the axolotl, a salamander with sort of the gills of a baby tadpole, and then there's Pee Wee Herman, which is, sort of pretty much the same. But then the question is, you go from here to, if it's sort of a juvenile, what was it? A juvenile of what? That's a sort of horror question. This is the egg. What's the juvenile? That's a juvenile of what? And of course, the picture is incomplete. But basically what we discovered was we took the DNA from this animal, we put it into a tree, compared it with other starfish, and it comes out at the bottom, literally in this case. And it comes out close to some of these slime stars. And so what the thing about that is that when you have something that's down on the bottom, you have this additional complication. Because at one point, there was all of these starfish that radiated early in the Mesozoic. And when they come out when an animal comes out on the bottom of this tree, it suggests that it's something that's sort of close to that early radiation, that early evolution of different kinds. Now, maybe that's kind of an esoteric idea. So a simpler animal to sort of demonstrate that with is the Balrog. Okay, so in the Lord of the Rings, the Balrogs were really abundant once, right? They were all over the place. People fought them until the elves killed them, blah, blah, blah. But really, there's only one left. And it's different from the ones that are from before. It's stronger because, it's the only one left. But it's evolved over time. But it's hidden in the sort of relict corner of the earth. It's hidden away. But it's changed. It hasn't remained static. It's altered over time. Balrogs, over the course of their evolution, I don't believe I've ever said that before, have changed. And so we see this. So Xyloplax, this little animal that I'm talking about, we can compare that to Balrogs. I don't think I've said that ever before also. So anyway, but that was my general point, the 3 lessons being learned. You now know more about starfish, about the other kinds of starfish that lived. Things that you do on the surface can affect things that live at 2,000 to 3,000 meters. Wood, And number 3, the most important part of a marine animal is probably the larva. So you have something like the BP oil spill. That is more likely to affect something like the little larvae that swim around, and you'll see that after impact in years to come. Rather than, it's certainly bad for the adults, but the impact, the really important part, probably is to come later. Here is a slide which shows my social media. I write a blog on echinoderms, and I have different Twitter thingamajiggies. And merely to illustrate my interest in bizarre things, here is a shot of some Japanese-inspired marine animals made into toys.
Starfish, standing out from Kelly Carnes. Give it up.
Questions?
Any questions for Chris? Any starfish or SpongeBob questions?
I think there was a starfish question from the peanut gallery before, right?
Yeah, so can you really call them starfish?
Okay, so long-standing debate between people who use the term sea star versus starfish. I think that it doesn't really matter. They're called asteroids, actually. And so scientifically, I would really just call them that. That's why I use them in. But people don't like asteroids because it sounds too much like giant interstellar rocks. So, but starfish and sea star are basically interchangeable terms. Now, this is a really almost divisive thing with some people. I actually know some scientists who've said, I wish I could take the term starfish and, like Rorschach said in Watchmen, to put my hands around it and choke it to death because they don't like it that much. But, so there we are. Starfish is fine. As long as you know they're not fish. They're not.
So we definitely worked in a Balrog reference, and now this is why we like him. Any other questions?
You're free to come up and get me later.
All right. Give it up for Dr. Chris Ma, everybody. All right. We got a 15-minute break. Go to the bathroom, get a drink, dance a little bit. We're coming back with the final 3 talks, guys.